making intelligent financial planning decisions during retirement and how that might give you a positive effect on your portfolio. The authors of the research study that we're talking about were trying to quantify what these good decisions would deliver to you, and they called that positive result gamma. Okay, so one of the elements of the gamma that you might get is delivered by optimizing your portfolio to realize that there's things in existence that we're often not thinking about, that are fixed, they're there, they're present, and we need to consider them in our asset allocation mix and optimize the portfolio for those items. When we build a portfolio, we're going to, if we put our investments outside of Canada and around the world, we're going to be taking on currency risk. We're creating currency risk, and we need to pay attention to that. That we want to be certain that we're making good decisions based on how the currency might be adding risk to our portfolio, or adding advantages to our portfolio. And currency is sometimes works in two different ways. I mean, we have Canadian investments, and we're thinking, well, then I'm not taking any currency risk, but maybe I am taking some currency risk because we buy so many things from outside the country. If I have all my money in Canada, then maybe I'm creating some currency risk on the things I might purchase that come from other countries. We also create currency risk, of course, a little bit more obviously when we make investments outside of Canada and those investments are made in some other currency, then we may get positive results in investments but negative results on the currency exposure. So we have to pay attention to currency. Inflation is always present, and it's always unknown in the future. We don't know what it's going to be. We don't know if it's going to be high or low, or controlled or not controlled. So we need to make sure that we're coming up with an asset allocation that's going to work well in whatever the future inflation environment is. You want to have things that will respond well to inflation. You want to mix in things that will protect you against inflation. You want to pay attention to inflation when you're trying to optimize your asset allocation. And this is the one I like, that there's a liability that is also attached to my asset. And we often forget that I have these assets that I am going to be using during my retirement. But if I actually stood back, I could say that, well, I also have a great liability. I know that to pay all my bills, I'm going to need so much money every year, year after year. I know what my property taxes are. I know what my average utility bill is. I know how much I eat, okay? Those things aren't going to change. I'm going to need a certain amount of money next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, if I want to still be alive. And if I am alive, there's a liability that exists today. I know that my portfolio is supposed to give me a certain amount of, I owe it to me. Think of it as your portfolio owes you a certain amount of money each year. So I don't just have assets, which we invest and make money on. I actually have the knowledge of an existence of a liability that is certain. I'm going to have to take that money from my portfolio. And it's the level of certainty that drives how we might make our investments, because I'm certain that I'm going to be withdrawing the money. I should be as certain that I'm going to have the money to withdraw. Okay. Now we talked about this a little bit with our already when we talked about designing a portfolio to understand our risk capacity. Well, risk capacity is all about, well, how much risk can I take, knowing that I have to take out a certain amount of money. Okay, we talked about this as in the dynamic withdrawal strategy part, where I am trying to take out a certain amount of money each year to live my life. Well, we're just extending that thought a little bit and saying, no, I'm not just going to take out a little bit of money each year to live my life. I need to take out a certain amount of money each year to live my life. Thus, I have already a liability. So when we optimize the asset allocation, we need to be clear about these hidden things. We have a liability that exists. We have currency risk that we've added to the mix. We have the big elephant in the room always, inflation. And so I always need to keep my eye on inflation and what we think will transpire there. We need to build that portfolio to make sure that it's going to perform well in a high inflation and a low inflation environment, because we really don't know today what's going to be the case in the next 30 some years. Okay, so we need to have a portfolio that's optimized for inflation unknowns. We need to have a portfolio that's optimized for currency unknowns. And most importantly, we need to have a portfolio that's optimized to recognize that I'm taking money out, whether for certain, it's a liability. So we don't just have a basket of assets we need to deal with. We actually already have a liability offsetting those assets. We already have a mortgage on the house because I've got a liability against my future that is represented by my future cash flow streams. And so the assets that I've invested are not just assets. I'm also got liabilities present. And so we need to optimize the portfolio that helps us deal with the certainty of that liability. It's easy if I'm a pension plan. I know that I've got assets that I need to manage, and I've got members that are going to retire at a certain day. And because they're going to retire on a certain day, I'm going to have to give them a fixed cash flow stream. So in the pension world, they always think in terms of assets and liabilities, and they make different decisions than you would make if all you thought about was your assets. And so all we're trying to suggest is that pay attention to the fact that there's a certainty to what you need. Excuse me. There's a certainty to what you need, and you're going to have to make those payments. So don't just deal with it as a basket of assets. Deal with a basket of assets and liabilities. And then consider the currency effects. Consider how adaptable I am to unexpected inflation and so on when we're optimizing our portfolio. You do all these things, you make good decisions in these areas, you will get a positive result in an increase in investment returns by doing so.